Mark 1. Conversations at the speed of sound.
On this particular landing, I felt the aircraft land, so I did a tick for Mick, and next thing was another bump, and I thought, that's strange. That landing was a good landing. We shouldn't have had a second bump there. And I looked out the window, and all I could see was flames.
The voice there of Gordon Johnstone. You're going to hear a little bit of Gordon's story in a moment. Before that, let me welcome you to Mac 1, the podcast of the Queensland Air Museum Caloundra. My name is Gary Hills. I am a QAM volunteer, and I'll be your host for this episode, where we look at an incident that occurred in 1968 to an Orion, a P-3B Orion aircraft that was due to be delivered to Australia for the RAAF, which crashed on landing. And you're going to hear the story from the perspective of Gordon, who was on board that day, about what happened. Gordon Johnstone joined me by phone, and so you'll hear his voice with that slightly tinny telephone sound to talk to me about his Air Force career. And we spoke for a long time. It was over an hour. And just for this episode, I have taken out the sections that we talked about particularly that related to the crash of 296, the P-3 Orion, and just a little bit of an intro before that of 5 minutes or so. But that's not to say that the entire story has not been collected and preserved. So for the oral history project in time, in due course, the entire 1 hour of that recording will be made available with a transcript. So that's to come in future in the oral history project. But just for today, we're going to focus in on just that one day in 1968 in April, when that P-3B Orion, after only having done 23 hours of flying, came down and came to grief at Moffatt Naval Air Station in California. So Gordon went on to a long career in the Air Force after this event, of course, and we don't have time to talk about it today, but just quickly, he went back to the Neptunes after coming back to Australia for a while, then was in command as a squadron leader, an AEO with a unit in Sydney. He then went to do quality control for the Barra Sonobuoy project, and then concluded his career as a squadron leader with over 5,000 hours in the air. A real gentleman. It was lovely to talk to him. So here's a little bit of my conversation with Gordon Johnstone. G'day, Gordon.
How are you, Gary?
I'm great. Thank you for asking, and thanks so much for joining me, because you've got a story to tell that I've been looking forward to hearing. I know little bits about this, but I would just love to hear it, particularly from the point of view of somebody firsthand who was there. So we'll get to that in a second. Let's first of all meet you. Where are you from, Gordon, and what's your aviation background?
Well, I was born in Ashfield in Sydney. And my parents bought a house up in Concord West.
Right.
And I lived there for most of my life until I joined the Air Force in June of 1955. Did recruit training up at RAAF Richmond at that stage.
Right.
I was just short of 20.
Okay.
Just short of 20. I was born in 1935, and this was 1955. So
okay.
It was just short of my 20th birthday. And while I was on recruit training, I had joined up as what was then classified as aircraftsman minor.
Aircraft.
In those days, you had to be 21
right.
To be an adult.
Right.
And I was an aircraftsman recruit minor. We had a good time up there at Richmond doing rookies, and a runway at Richmond was being done up at in that year. They had a mound of dirt at the end of the prepared section of the runway, which they completed about half of it. One weekend, I wandered down to near the runway, just to see 22 Squadron, just to see watching the vampires doing circuits and bumps. And one of the aircraft came in and touched the top of the mound of dirt, touched it rather hard, and his starboard wheel broke off because he barreled off down the runway and did a bit of a 90-degree turn on the wheel into the grass. But what tickled me was that the first person to get to him was the orderly sergeant on his push bike. The fire truck eventually came in, and the fire truck, I think, was doing flat out at about 10 miles an hour, and eventually got to him. But fortunately, there was no fire, and it was okay. I joined up as an aircraft engine mech. I put my application in and applied to become a signaller. In 1956, went down to Ballarat to do signaller training, to do the radio side of signaller training.
Mm-hmm.
And we were the last course to do the radio side of it at Ballarat. And then in the beginning of 1957, we went across to East Sale to do aerial gunnery on the Lincoln aircraft.
I see.
And for 3 months, we trained on the Lincoln. I was posted to 36 Squadron at Fairburn. They were the Dakotas. We did quite a few exciting trips. We got into a few scrapes in the travelling around, trying to land at Townsville on one trip. We had to land because we were in I think it must have been a cyclone, or very close to it. And we didn't have enough fuel to go anywhere else. We did 2 approaches and couldn't get in because of the weather. And the skipper said, "Well, we'll make one more attempt. And if we can't get in this time, we're going to have to ditch in Townsville Harbour." Trying to ditch a Dakota in that kind of weather in the ocean, it was not something to look forward to.
Yeah.
So I stood up between the 2 pilots, and as I approached the runway for the last time, it would have been the last time, I saw the lights and yelled out and guided them onto the end of the runway, and we landed, and it was absolutely bucketing down. Terrible. But anyway, we made it. In June of 1958, I was commissioned. Middle of 1959, I got posted to Perth for the Air Training Corps over there as the squadron training officer in charge of the training for all the Air Training Corps cadets in Western Australia. And these guys were ex-World War II. They had some fantastic stories. It was fascinating for a young bloke like me at that time. At the end of 62, got posted to 11 Squadron because at that stage, being a signaller, the only aircraft to use signallers were the Neptunes at 10 Squadron or 11 Squadron. 10 Squadron at Townsville, 11 Squadron at Richmond.
Yep.
So I got posted to Richmond. Okay. At the end of 67, we ended up being sent over to America to train on the Orions, the P-3B Orions, which were replacing the Neptunes. And we were training over in America to bring the aircraft back again.
And I believe there were 10 that were in the original purchase contract for the P-3Bs. Right, so tell us about the P-3Bs. I mean, at the museum we have a P-3C, number 760. What's the difference between the B and the C?
Well, the difference as far as the operators were concerned, down the back of the aircraft, there was very little difference in the front end of it for the pilots and flight engineers. Very little difference at all. But down the back end was quite different. The general layout was different, but the equipment that was on board was quite different. We got the first of the RAAF ones early in 1968, and we were using them from there on to get used to the aircraft, get used to the equipment, and prepare to fly them back to Australia.
And things didn't go according to plan, I believe, in April of that year.
Yes, on the 11th of April, our crew was scheduled to do a 3-hour sortie of local training, circuits and bumps, and local flying around the area. And we did this. The pilots had decided that they would each do 8 landings, and because we were only doing circuits and bumps, the skipper had said to the crew that as long as I've got minimum crew, the rest of you don't need to come on this trip if you don't want to. We ended up only with 8 people on the aircraft, but we took off at 1 o'clock, and the skipper was in the left-hand seat. It's Tom Trinder, and he said to me, "Look, Gordon, I was doing radio at that stage. Getting used to the radio was just slightly different to what I'd been used to as a caterer on the Neptune." And he said to me, "Look, seeing you've got a little to do, why don't you keep a tab of the number of landings that each of us has done, because we need that information later on for the authorisation book." Right. And I did a tick of each landing that Tom Trinder did. He did his lot, and then he swapped over with Mick Dunn. And Mick Dunn was the co-pilot, and Mick went into the left-hand seat. And we were all set to do the next 8 landings. And on this particular landing, I felt the aircraft land, so I did a tick for Mick, and next thing was another bump, and I thought, that's strange. That landing was a good landing. We shouldn't have had a second bump there. And I looked out the window, and all I could see was flames and sparks coming from underneath the port wing. So I immediately yelled out through the intercom, "Fire in the port wheel, fire in the port wheel," and alerted everybody else in the aircraft that we had problems. And we went down the runway. As it turned out, the oleo, the port oleo had broken, and it had scooted off across the runway and across the airfield, right through about 20 Orions on the other side of the field, and missed every one of them. Didn't hit one aircraft. Very, very lucky. But
so this is the landing gear strut, isn't it, that failed? Is that right?
Yes, it was the strut with the wheel on it. The wing had dropped, obviously. The propellers had hit the ground and shattered. Speared through the engines, broken the fuel lines, and the aircraft was on fire straight away. We went down the runway and did a 270-degree turn back through the flames. And when I immediately thought, I know what's going to happen here. aircraft fuselage might very well be in a situation where I know we can only get out over the starboard wing.
Mm.
And I thought, if anything happens there, we're not going to get out of this aircraft at all. So I immediately undid my seatbelt, went to go back to take out the starboard overwing hatch to make sure that we could get out, but the fuselage it hadn't been warped. Anyway, I got up from the seat, the radio seat, and turned around to go back, and all I could see was daylight on the right-hand side of the seat. All the debris that was coming through the fuselage, it cut through the fuselage, and the toilet was right opposite that as well, and there was a terrific amount of damage done there, and I thought, this is stupid. I'm not going to go through there because with all this propellers and engine bits coming through the fuselage, that I might be history.
Yeah.
So I thought, the heck with it. I went up and I jumped on the floor in the cockpit behind the flight engineer's seat.
Yep.
And stayed there, braced myself there with the spare of the flight engineer. The two of us were there, and we braced ourselves until the aircraft came to rest. And then I went down, and as it turned out, the navigator had taken the hatch out. It was just behind where he was sitting anyway, and he had taken the hatch out, and he'd gone out of the aircraft by the time I got there. I was the second out of the aircraft, and got out over the wing and jumped from the wing onto the ground and injured my feet. I've suffered ever since with the jarred the feet and the ankles, knees and hips, and arthritis has gone right through me. Replaced my right ankle. Both knees have been replaced. Right hip has been replaced. Left shoulder has been replaced. And my right shoulder now is heading for replacement as well.
You've got a drop of 3 or 4 metres, haven't you, off that wing onto to the hard surface?
Yeah.
And
it didn't look that far when I jumped. But I was second out, and I jumped. I was out through flames. It was on fire when I got out.
Really?
And the 8 of us got out safely. The only other injury was to the captain, and he bumped his knee on the centre console in the cockpit as he was getting out. But everybody else got out safely without injury. Now, had we had the full crew of 12 people, there might very well have been a problem with the last couple of guys trying to get out with the flames and damage to the aircraft. After we got back out and ran away from the aircraft, one of the chaps had his camera. He was taking photos of the fire, and we got back and we were standing around watching the rest of the fuselage burn up. And one of the Americans said to us, "Who told you to get out?" I said, "I beg your pardon." He said, "Who told you to get out?" And this reflects the attitude of the US Navy people.
Yeah.
And I said to him, "You must be kidding." I said, "We had flames on our backside. Who the devil do you think told us to get out? We practice our drills. We know what to do. Nobody had to tell us to get out, and we didn't have to ask approval to get out. We knew what to do." So I said, that's why all of us got out safely.
Now, I have a couple of photographs, as you mentioned, of 296 on fire, and we'll post those along with this recording so people can see the damage. Obviously, the aircraft was completely destroyed. Because
of the early warning that I'd given everybody to the danger, I was awarded what's called a green entry in my logbook, which is a commendation. Rather than get a medal, you get a green entry in your logbook. So
yes, we're very grateful that all 8 of you were able to exit without serious injury, although you did, as you say, sustain some lifelong injuries as a result of that. And what was the problem? What caused this strut to fail? What did they discover?
Well, the port undercarriage, had a crack in it. As it turned out, we found out that initially it had a crack in it, and it was submitted to Lockheed, who did their check on it, and they obviously did it, and rejected it because it had a crack. And we heard that it was rejected and sent back to the manufacturer, who apparently put another coat of chrome work over it, sent it back to Lockheed, and I can only assume that Lockheed didn't do a check on it the second time, but put it on the aircraft. So it went on the aircraft with a crack in it. So it was faulty right from the word go. It had only done 16 landings before it broke.
Yes, I believe that aircraft had only flown 23 hours or something like that when this happened. And so what's the process then, Gordon? You've escaped from this crash site. What happens immediately afterwards to you 8?
Well, immediately after that, on that day, we went up to the room that was being used as an orderly room, and we immediately wrote our version of the accident. We said exactly what we remembered of the accident. It was fortunate that the admino was an ex-RAAF aircrew, and as soon as he realised that the aircraft was an RAAF aircraft, he said to one of these guys, "You go down and get a dozen glasses." The other one, "You go down, here's some money, go down to the canteen and get a bottle of scotch." And by the time we got up there, we each had a nip of scotch to steady our nerves. But they had a board of inquiry, and they found that the undercarriage leg had broken. There was no fault of the crew, but we had bought our aircraft from the US Navy. That's where the problem arose, because we had to sue the US Navy, and the US Navy had to sue Lockheed. And Lockheed, they came to an agreement, but the money changed hands, and the new aircraft was sent over. 605, I think, was the number on.
605, that's right. So by September the following year, I think 605 came to replace the loss of 296.
We all just got on with our work, and eventually, a few weeks later, loaded the aircraft instead of 296. We ended up with 294. Our crew flew back to Australia. They had a big welcome ceremony there for the new aircraft. Edinburgh. Our families had all come over from Sydney to Edinburgh. So we settled down into Edinburgh with the P-3Bs. They were exciting aircraft. Because it was the first maritime aircraft that we had where we could stand upright through the length of the aircraft, the length of the fuselage.
They're incredibly spacious inside, aren't they?
They are. They're marvellous.
But, I've crawled over the spar of the Neptune and, looked around inside our Neptune, and then, you compare that, you go across to the Orion, and as you say, you stand upright, it's spacious, it's insulated, it's an amazing step forward in terms of crew comfort and capacity for instrumentation and so on. Yeah.
Yes, well, we had had a galley down the back of the Neptune, but there was nothing compared to the galley and a couple of seats there for the crew at the back of the Orion.
And bunks for crew resting and...
Yes.
And you even had a toilet, mate.
Yes, which is far better than toilet facilities in the Neptune, I can tell you. pretty crude. But, yes, there was even a toilet in the Orion.
You know, look, I really appreciate you telling us this story because, we're touching on a very difficult topic and one that, can't have always been easy to look back on and reflect on. But, we're pleased that all 8 of you, were safe and that you were able to continue your career after that. It's been an honour, mate, to hear your voice and to hear you describe your career and particularly that incident where you put your life on the line and you're here to tell the tale. So can I just say, Gordon, thank you so much for talking to us.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Gary. It's a pleasure.
So that's our episode. Thanks, folks, for listening. I am sorry to say that there will be no episode next Saturday. We will have a break for 1 week before the next episode is available. I'm travelling for work overseas for the next 9 or 10 days and won't be able to get to that, so I do apologise for that. But we will be back in a couple of weeks' time to have a talk to a gentleman who has been involved for many years just as a private individual, a private citizen, looking for the wrecks of aircraft, particularly significant wartime aircraft, but not just them, to find often aircraft wrecks that have been lost and note their positions and find them. So that's a very interesting conversation with Rick Wilkins in the next episode in a couple of weeks' time. Don't forget the Queensland Air Museum is open from 10 till 4 every day except Christmas Day and Good Friday, and we would love to see you. Come on down and visit us soon. Bye for now.